Honda has DCT, BMW has ASA, KTM are working on their own. This move towards automatic gearboxes on off-road machines has been clear as day, and these boxes have their pros. But really, all this tech so far has been reserved for the manufacturer's motherships. When it comes to actual off-road machines, as in dirt bikes, those have escaped the dumbness train. Sure, you have recluse clutches, system which essentially takes out the need for a clutch. But that's not an autobox. You still have to shift gears. Look, on paper, an automatic dirt bike could have a ton of advantages. No more missed shifts, smoother, better focus on riding position. That's without even mentioning how easy it would be for beginners to pick up the sport. Why wouldn't it work?
That's exactly the question Husqvarna engineers asked all the way back in the 70s. And what they came up with was one of the most state-of-the-art motorcycles of all time.
Looking at these machines from afar, everything looked normal. They used regular chassis, regular brakes, and suspension setups. On a closer inspection though, you would notice some things were different. For one, the Kickstarter was placed on the left-hand side, meaning a lot of folks could only fire up the bike while standing next to it. The gearbox, despite being wildly unconventional, ended up being not that much heavier and bulkier than manuals, which made the engine simply slot into existing frames. Its 4 speeds were versatile enough, and the only choice a rider had was a small lever: neutral or drive. Nothing else. The beauty of simplicity.
Okay, nothing in life is free, and the system came with some drawbacks, such as you basically couldn't bump start the bike.
But with that, because of its origins, these gearboxes were incredibly easy to disassemble and repair, as a mechanic didn't have to split the engine case. You might say, a brilliant design.
I mentioned the origins here, and that's important. You see, Husqvarna didn't just get a light bulb moment telling them to sell auto dirt bikes to the public. In fact, this entire opportunity arose from the Swedish military.
In 1973, the government needed new motorcycles for their infantry, machines that had to tick a certain number of boxes. At first, requirements were simple. A 100-watt quartz lighting system, low operating noise, easy to fix and easy to ride. Performance was not part of the equation back then, but rideability was. The army wanted to have a machine that a new recruit could learn how to ride in just 1 week, without having any previous dirt bike experience. Looking at the list of requirements, 3 companies took on the task:
Haglunds, Monarch, and Husqvarna. And initially, Husky didn't win this. Haglunds did.
Their engineers managed to build a prototype based around a snowmobile engine, thus eliminating the need for shifting gears. It had a fuel tank incorporated into the frame, cast wheels. If you look at the pictures, this was a bespoke machine. Meanwhile, Husky's proposal looked like any other motorcycle.
With the win in hand, Haglunds had one last thing to do: mass produce their models. And here they came across a problem. They couldn't.
Late into the process, they realized their prototype was too ambitious. In a nutshell, there was no way they were going to satisfy the quantity needs for the army, so their given contract got taken away from them and given back to the runner-up, Husqvarna.
For 1973, the Swedes got awarded a 3,300 unit contract to build their 250cc auto dirt bikes. While on the outside, this looked like a familiar motorcycle, the inside was a completely different story.
When their engineers first tackled the issue, they looked into using conventional solutions. Torque converters were considered, as well as hydrostatic systems. The problem was, all of these were just too complicated. They needed to simplify things, but in engineering, coming up with a simple solution to a complicated problem is the skill that sets apart one engineer from the other. And Husqvarna asked one of their best to work on a solution: Lars-Erik Gustafsson.
Lars went back to the drawing board. He had to find another way, and the inspiration came right from their backyard.
You see, Husqvarna, as most of you know, also built chainsaws. And those don't need a clutch. So Lars took that system as inspiration and went on to draw a completely revolutionary gearbox. What he came up with was a solution so simple, so elegant. Even today you can admire it. Essentially, Lars figured out something. If he attached a bunch of clutch shoes to the spinning axles of the engine, he could keep those shoes close to the axle with springs. As the engine axle spun faster with the addition of RPMs, the centrifugal force would pull away these shoes. This entire system was cased inside a round basket. You see where this is going? As the engine spun faster, the shoes would push harder on the walls. That was your clutch, completely automatic. The springs were calculated so that they would engage roughly around 2,500 RPM.
If you want another analogy, think of this as a reverse drum brake. Okay, that's how you get rid of the clutch. But they needed the gear shifting to work autonomously as well. Let me remind you, this was the 70s. Computer-controlled gearboxes were far from reality.
What Lars came up with was even cleverer. Now, this explanation might not be the most scientific, but essentially, Lars had every gear in the box correspond to one such set of auto clutches. They had different springs, so as the bike accelerated, the gearbox would naturally shift to higher gears at certain speed. It was brilliant, the rider didn't need to offer any extra input. And so the designers could get rid of both the clutch lever and shift pedal. The system had a limitation, and you'll see that come into play a little later. Essentially, by design, the bike could only upshift under load and downshift when the throttle was idle. Keep this one in mind.
Even so, Lars had done it. The world's first proper dirt bike with a fully automatic gearbox. The military loved it. And that made the Swedish executives ask themselves, why wouldn't a regular rider appreciate their autos too?
A lot of those same advantages could benefit regular guys and girls. Over the years, they ended up implementing this gearbox tech into multiple bikes, from a 360cc all the way to a 500. They tasted success in national enduro championships. Okay, motocross was far from ideal, but these machines were never really built for that. Especially since, because of the slippery nature of the mechanism, gate starts were a big Achilles heel.
Good or bad, it's all subjective. What's not is, whenever such a big paradigm shift comes on the scene, people need time to adapt.
And that was the case with these autos. You couldn't take your habits from manual bikes and translate them here, because these bikes were so different and felt like it. For one, well, obvious, riders had no control over the gears, which sometimes is good, but other times you need to be able to have some sort of predictability. Also, when approaching a corner, as you let off the gas, the bike started freewheeling. Some riders described the sensation as accelerating even faster towards said corner. This meant that its rider had to become an expert at modulating the back brake, as those were their only means of controlling the rear.
That said, it wasn't all bad. It freed up brain power. Multiple of their riders said so. As shifting was out of their mind, they could focus more on their lines and braking points.
Also, this opened up a bunch of ergonomic options, like some opting to have dual brake pedals, one each side. This way, no matter where you're dangling your foot for balance, you always had free access to a back brake. Kinda smart, not gonna lie. If these were all the downsides, I think autoboxes would have had a great future ahead. Unfortunately, the issues didn't stop here. Far from it.
When trying to power slide the rear, if the rider dared to let go of the gas, the motorcycle would instantly hook to the ground and throw its rider into a high side.
Controlling the pitch angle of the motorcycle on jumps was an acquired taste, let's call it. Also, remember how I mentioned that the bike would only downshift when no throttle was applied? About that. When approaching a corner, racers had to develop a new riding skill in order to force the bike not to downshift prematurely. They would slam on both brakes while still holding the throttle open, thus forcing the gearbox mechanism to stay engaged and in gear. Just imagine coming up to a corner with both throttle and brakes applied at the same time.
Oh, and there's more. These were just the riding style challenges. In practice, when ridden hard, the transmission fluid would get so hot it could melt boots through the engine casing.
Assuming that didn't happen, the first gear springs also had a tendency to fail. You would start off, the spring would break, but you wouldn't know. You come back to the pits, stop the bike in neutral, and restart it half-hour later.
You would warm it up, pull it in drive, and instantly loop it. As soon as those springs were broken, engaging drive would propel you forward even at idle.
Look, in Europe, these machines didn't end up gaining much traction. People were more conservative and didn't appreciate the autoboxes much. Over the pond in the States, the story was similar. Sure, in some areas they had some success, as the rougher the trails, the more this platform made sense. Also over there, Terry Cunningham won 5 consecutive AMA Enduro National Championships on such bikes.
What I'm trying to say here, these automatic Huskies were good enough to not be killed, but flew far away from commercial success. In 1986, Electrolux sold Husqvarna to the Italians at Cagiva, and as soon as they got their hands on the manufacturer, the Autobox line was killed. For 12 years, automatic dirt bikes lived on showroom floors.
And during them, they gathered a small but dedicated following. People that, decades later, went to build modern versions of those machines. Jimmy Lennox took an '08 Husky frame, adapted 2019 plastics, and shoved in a 1986 automatic power unit. Weird, quirky, but unique. That's why, in a way, maybe that timing was wrong.
Or maybe, commercially, nobody really asked for automatic dirt bikes. I mean, if that was true, Honda didn't get the memo. Little known fact, after the Huskies went off market, the Japanese went to work trying to develop their own.
They saw potential in it. The prototype was called the RC250MA, but it never gained much traction. US riders tested it and quickly discarded the idea. The prototype then raced in Japan for another 2 years.
And afterwards it simply got canned. Look, while an Autobox as well, this functioned in a completely different way to Husqvarna's. The Honda acted more like a CVT.
In essence, the Japanese engineers attached a pump to the 250 engine. As the revs went up, this pump would generate more pressure and would engage a system that drove the wheels.
More RPMs, more pressure, more speed. Simple concept. But the problem was the same. Nobody asked for it. Not in the dirt bike world. That's why Honda dumped the system to their street division.
Look, let's be real here. Do I want an automatic dirt bike? No, I have no interest in such thing, especially not powered by internal combustion. At the end of the day, the Husqvarna autos were a failure. Kind of. But if I'm left with something from this story, those were times where companies were not afraid to innovate. Times that I didn't live in. But compared to modern days, where bold new graphics are the headline of new launches, those were exciting times.
I get it. Modern motorcycles are really good. The better a product gets, the harder it is to inflict significant change. Think of your iPhone, same story. I understand it. But still, those were some truly exciting decades for riders and engineers alike. Thanks for watching.